But right now, a session that I've been very much looking forward to, Land Acknowledgement Statements, moving from paper to action, with Jasmine Gurneau of Northwestern University and Adam Kessel of the Forest Preserves of Cook County. Now it's my great pleasure to turn the stage over to Adam and Jasmine.
All right, thank you, Brendan. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, bright and early. I hope everyone has their cup of coffee or tea to get you going in the morning. Again, my name is Adam Kessel. I am a program coordinator with the Cook County Forest Preserves, or the Forest Preserves of Cook County. I've been with the Forest Preserves for coming up to about 10 years now. A little bit about myself. I'm Lakota, Italian, and German. That's my ancestry, and it's customary in the Native community to introduce yourself and give all those little bits of history as an acknowledgement to our ancestors. So I want to take a moment to do that. I know that you've probably heard a few staff people from the Forest Preserve speak, so I have to give our spiel, right? So the Forest Preserves of Cook County is the largest and oldest forest preserve municipal forest preserve network in the country with over 70,000 acres. And I'm coming to you live from one of our 6 nature centers, Trailside Museum in River Forest. It's central, it's just west of Chicago, a near western suburb. And I'm going to be waiting Jasmine's having some connectivity issues, so I'm going to hold off on doing her introduction this morning. But I'm going to jump right into sharing my screen and show you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. So give me one moment. Okay. So everyone should be seeing the land acknowledgement statements. Opening slide. So again, I'm Adam Kessel. I'm going to move right through this. And as you heard me before speak, I was doing the introduction to the forest preserves. And generally, when we do this introduction, we start with our 2 big ticket items, right? We're the biggest and we're the oldest in the country. But it's important to note that the story of the forest preserves didn't start 100 years ago in a commissioner's boardroom, right? It started with Indigenous people. It started with the Native people within this land. And land acknowledgement statements give us an opportunity to acknowledge that and move it forward in the ways that we're working with Native people. I'm going to have to ask real quick in sharing my screen. I'm sorry. Hold on one second. In sharing my screen, I can't tell if Jasmine's on yet. It doesn't look like she is. So I'm going to just continue on here.
Adam, I'm happy to let you know when Jasmine is successfully in the stage.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Then I will keep going. So as I said before, the story starts well before the foundation of the forest preserves. And I'm going to take a moment right now to read the land acknowledgement statement of the Forest Preserves of Cook County. The Forest Preserves of Cook County acknowledges that we are on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, the Potawatomi, and Potawatomi tribes, and a place of trade with many other tribes, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. As a land management agency, we acknowledge that we have played a role in shaping the histories of local Native Americans by acquiring this land. We must also recognize, share, and celebrate the history of local Native Americans and their immemorial ties to this land. We commit ourselves to developing deeper partnerships that advocate for the progress, dignity, and humanity of the many diverse Native Americans who still live and practice their heritage and traditions on this land today. So I'm going to take a moment, and as we wait for Jasmine to get her technology in order at home.
Jasmine is here.
Awesome.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
Jasmine. So not to throw you right in, but if you wanted to take a moment to do your introduction, and then we're on the land acknowledgement statement slide for Northwestern.
I'm ready. First of all, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this early Sunday morning. My name is Jasmine Gurneau. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the manager for Native American and Indigenous initiatives at Northwestern University. It's located with my positions within the office of the provost. And you'll see here Northwestern's land acknowledgement statement. We have a web page dedicated with the full statement. But I also wanted to just take this time to share that this place where Adam and I are logging in from has always been a central hub for trade and travel and exchange of ideas and knowledge, stories, songs. And so we are continuing that spirit and that tradition through this Wild Things conference presentation today and these last few weekends with you all coming together from wherever you're logging in from. And if you know the traditional homelands where you're logging in from, feel free to share it in the stage chat, just your name and where the traditional homelands in which you're logging in from. So thanks.
Awesome. Okay. So our agenda, real quick today. Jasmine, you want to take the agenda slide?
So we'll be sharing and going over what a land acknowledgement is, and Adam and I will both be sharing our own personal or institutional's pathway to the land acknowledgements being created at our respective institutions, and then talk about what it means to integrate it into interpretive practice, and then share a little bit about beyond the land acknowledgement statement, as it's just a first step. We'll give you all a chance to do some self-reflection and have a brief closing activity before we part.
Excellent. Okay, so right now, go ahead, Brendan. Brendan's going to be posting a poll in the stage poll area, and we're going to ask everybody to take a moment to answer this question. Have you ever read a land acknowledgement before an event or program? So I can't see the poll because of the way my screen share is. So Jasmine, if you wanted to let us know what it looks like when the numbers start coming in.
And the poll is live now. So at the top of the chat area of the stage chat on the right side of your screen, go ahead and click polls and you'll see this morning's poll.
It's not showing up on mine, and I'm afraid to mess with anything again.
Yeah, so the results are coming in. It's
there it is.
50-50. Leaning a little bit no with 32 votes and yes with 27 votes.
Excellent. Okay.
Hey, so a good mix.
Definitely. All right. So knowing that, it's about a 50-50 split between people that have used the land acknowledgement or a land acknowledgement statement before an event or a program, and maybe there's some folks that are listening today that have never used a land acknowledgement or even know what a land acknowledgement is. So what we kind of started off with was the statement from a Call to Acknowledge guide. This was put out by the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture a few years ago. And I'm going to read it because I thought it was a really great way to phrase what a land acknowledgement is, right? So acknowledgement is a simple, powerful way of showing respect and a step toward correcting the stories and practices that erase Indigenous peoples' history and culture, and toward inviting and honoring the truth. Right? So as interpreters, whether you're working for a land management agency, a land trust, whether you're a volunteer that's working on the land, it's important to note that the land is storied, right? And as interpreters, as representatives of this land, we have the power to tell these different stories or not tell these stories, whether it's intentional or not. And a land acknowledgement really is an opportunity to just ground ourselves in land and tell the stories of Indigenous people. And what that does is it refuses the erasure and invisibility of Indigenous people in history of these places. It also does the second thing. So once you get the land acknowledgement, you write it, you're really excited about sharing it. The second piece is that the land acknowledgement really becomes a vehicle for you and the organization that you work for to begin building partnerships with the Indigenous community, whether it's a tribal government or a Native serving organization. So these are two things that we're going to talk a little bit more about later in the presentation. But in the essence, that's what a land acknowledgement statement is. Jasmine, did you want to add anything?
No, that was great.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to start with the path for the forest preserves. And really I wanted to start by talking about a committee that was founded. It's the Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. We're going to call it the READY Committee. And really what that committee is about, its main focus for the forest preserves is to operationalize equity, right? These are public lands, and we want to make sure in the forest preserves of Cook County that every single person that lives in Cook County feels welcome and feels safe on forest preserve lands. But as an organization, we also want to make sure that our staff feels welcome and safe in our workplace. And this was an opportunity. This committee is staffed with doing that, right? Operationalizing equity. For the land acknowledgement statement, I didn't sit on the READY committee, but I was honored enough to be asked to help write the land acknowledgement. So this was the body that helped to write it. We also worked with the American Indian Center of Chicago. As I said before, the best practice, right? You don't want to write this land acknowledgement statement in a bubble. You don't want to go and just pick and choose from other websites. Those are definitely starting points. But really the land acknowledgement is an opportunity to reach out to the Native community, whether it's a tribal government or a Native serving organization. And the READY committee was that platform, that place, that safe place to have these conversations. Now, moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit more about taking the land acknowledgement statement a step further. Once the land acknowledgement statement is in place, there's going to be asks around land use for ceremony and for other things. And this is the committee that helps to make these things operationalized within this organization so that we can meet these asks and respond in a respectful way and in a timely fashion. So the READY committee was essential in getting our land acknowledgement statement written. I'm going to pass it over to Jasmine.
All right. So at Northwestern, our story kind of the land acknowledgement pathways starts around 2013 when our undergraduate student group, our Native undergraduate student group, was made aware of our institution's history with one of our founders, our main founders, John Evans, and his connection to the Sand Creek Massacre. And so I'm going to take you on like a little story walk here. So the laptop with the feather is a petition that the student group started circulating, asking the university to acknowledge its history and to start to grapple with it and take some steps to move forward. And so our former provost put together a John Evans study committee to like formally look in a maybe like a scholarly approach to his connection. And so that was established, and partway through their research, they held an open forum, and a lot of community members showed up to that, and they realized that, you know, no matter what this formal report says, that at the end of the day, Northwestern was still not being welcoming and inclusive to Native folks. And so before they even concluded their report, they established the Native American Outreach and Inclusion Task Force, so a separate committee of administrators, students, staff, alumni, and they came up with 59 recommendations of ways to move forward. And also in the top right corner, you see some folks standing. They established a Native American Leadership Council, which was comprised of 10 folks from around the country that were scholars, experts in their field, to kind of get us started as we're building our own critical mass of Native folks at Northwestern, to give us some guidance. And they meet with our president, our provost, and our chief diversity officer on an annual basis. The last two photos in the bottom right with the fire, these are Sand Creek Massacre descendants, and we've been commemorating on an annual basis. We now hold a Sand Creek Massacre commemoration event, and for the past 5 years now, we've invited descendants of survivors of the Sand Creek Massacre out to share their story, to share things that are happening in their communities now, and building relationships with Cheyenne and Arapaho communities, which were part of the Sand Creek Massacre. And then in the bottom middle is one of my proudest moments at Northwestern is the tribal chairman of the Menominee tribe and the president of their logging company, because that shiny court behind them was built using Menominee lumber. So an example of an economic partnership with a tribal nation. And this was the opening game. We presented a basketball to them, and it was a wonderful celebration. And then just sharing a little bit about how we've been kind of indigenizing campus. About 1.5 years ago, we debuted this logo and poster of our Land Acknowledgement, a visual that has water and the canoe representing folks were here, a couple of our medicines and plant relatives, and it's in poster form and logo so that folks can start to embed it through if they want to print it out and post it on their building's door, their office, they can. And in the right side, you'll see me posing with a couple of our graduating students, and we made stoles for them with some oak and maple leaves just to kind of represent the landscape around us and the plant communities that we're part of. And then also we have our academic N logo, which we filled with birch bark also to represent the birch trees in the area, and just kind of bring visibility to Indigenous communities and that local landscape to light in a visual way.
Excellent. So we're going to now kind of talk about within the forest preserves how we're integrating the land acknowledgement into interpretive practice. And I kind of think about this in two forms, right? We have active and we have passive ways to integrate your land acknowledgement. So through this process, you're building partnerships, you're beginning to communicate with your with the Native community within your region, within your area. And then you get this land acknowledgement statement written, right? It can really go one of two ways. And I think that the goal is that it's an active statement, right? We talk about our presentation as moving from paper to action. So some of the passive ways that you can integrate the land acknowledgement is by posting it on the website. The Forest Preserves has their land acknowledgement statement on the website. And that's definitely a good thing. We want to be able to share it with everybody. Once you get your land acknowledgement together, it's also an opportunity for other agencies, other organizations to look to that as the model, right? How are we going to do it? How did they do it? What words did they use? How did they frame their land acknowledgement? Including it in your email signature line, and of course posting it at different locations. So those would be some passive ways to integrate it. Now at the Forest Preserves, we had a big kickoff. on the left of the screen, there's public programs. This was the first time we read the land acknowledgement publicly, was on Indigenous Peoples Day in 2019, and it was celebrating the new Serpent Twin Mound at Schiller Woods, which was installed by a local artist. His name's Santiago X. He's an Indigenous futurist artist. He does amazing stuff. He has a few exhibits that actually just opened this week. I suggest you check him out. But this was the first time that there were mounds installed or built in the forest preserves in thousands of years, right? By Santiago X is from one of the mound building tribes. So that in itself was significant. But for the forest preserves, having this opportunity on Indigenous Peoples Day to read the land acknowledgement, one, showing that we're an ally and we're supporting the Native community locally and nationally, but also it's an opportunity to make that promise that we're going to continue to do good work. We're going to continue to work with and serve the Native community as a land management agency. So that was a wonderful active way to do this. And I would suggest in moving forward, as everyone writes their land acknowledgement statements, have an event where you're sharing it with the public, but most importantly, you're sharing it with the Native community that you were working with to write it. Moving from there, the professional development piece, once it was rolled out, staff needed professional development. We had meetings, we talked about it. Some folks were a little bit uncomfortable, one with the pronunciation of tribes, two with, once you read the land acknowledgement, people were a little bit apprehensive because they didn't know all the Native history of the land. And that's rightfully so. So we needed to support our staff by designing and running trainings to help everyone feel more comfortable about using the land acknowledgement. So at this point, Brennan's going to post in our chat 2 links. So one of the steps that we took at the Forest Preserves around professional development is we created a land acknowledgement usage guide. So it kind of breaks down the land acknowledgement. One piece is that we need to differentiate it based on the audience that we're talking to. So the land acknowledgement that I read this morning isn't appropriate to read in an early childhood program, right? So what we did is we integrated language, and think about how powerful that is now. So instead of reading the land acknowledgement, we're going to be a part of the language revitalization efforts. If we're talking about living culture, language is living, right? And it comes from the land for Indigenous people. So having an opportunity to teach language is super important, and that's in that document. Also, Brandon's going to be sharing a link to the call to acknowledge guide. I forgot to mention that. So that will be in the chat as well, so you can see those. So those were 2 steps that we took, right? Other active statements as we move forward. Oh, and this is this is a video from River Trail Nature Center, another one of the nature centers in the Forest Preserves of Cook County. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the audio to work appropriately this morning, but what you would be seeing is the assistant director there, Brian Winters, doing a small serendipity program. So it's an early childhood program. It's fully virtual. And he goes through and introduces the young ones to the idea that we're on native land, right? And one of the tribes that called this place home and still calls this place home is the Ojibwe people. So what he did was he taught everybody how to say hello in Ojibwe. So it was a call and response. So I'm going to do a virtual call and response to everybody at home. I'm taking it from Brian. Thank you, Brian. Brendan's also sharing this link, so after our presentation, you can check it out on Facebook and see how he does it. But we're going to learn how to say hello. So it's bonjour, bonjour. Now it's your turn at home. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Yeah. And then traditionally it would be bonjour anin. So we say bonjour anin. So bonjour anin. So now you just learned how to say hello in Ojibwe or Anishinaabe. So again, Brian does a great job. I suggest after this talk you check out the video. But that's one way that we differentiated the land acknowledgement statement to address different age groups that we would be using it with. All right. And then, kind of coming full circle, You've integrated it into, you've written it, you've integrated it into your interpretive practices, but now how do we take it a step further? And again, on the left, this was just this past winter solstice. This is at Whistler Woods. We did a winter solstice ceremony there. And this was in partnership with Friends of the Forest Preserves, who took this photo, the St. Kateri Center out of Chicago, and American Indian Health Services out of Chicago. So St. Kateri Center, American Indian Health Services, both two Native serving organizations within Chicago. And this was a great opportunity. This is the type of work around land access that we're hoping to get to, right, for ceremony. And I'll give you a small example of, this may not look like much in this photograph, right? But there are policies in place, like not having recreational fires on the ground, that are problematic for ceremony, because the ceremony must be on the ground. So in the forest preserves, if we have a fire, it's usually in a fire pit, unless it's a fire associated with a restoration, right? In this case, we had a fire that was associated with this ceremony. So how did we address it? I'm trained for wildlife fire management, right? So if you look in the picture, you'll see a nice big backpack pump sprayer right there. There's a flapper and a shovel and all these other things that we have to have as land managers in order to keep a fire safe. It's also in a burn scar, which is another layer, right? We don't want to add burn scars to the forest preserves. But the most important part of this is there's that side of fire management, but then there's also a cultural side of fire, right? So for this, I was the fire keeper. So part of this ceremony is the way that we build the fire, how we build the fire, how we ignite the fire. All of these things, because this is a medicine fire, is important. So we start seeing how these things are just different sides of the same coin. So having some pieces in place within your organization, so that if this request came through without these layers to it, it would easily be said no to before that, because maybe someone wasn't interpreting what the fire was about. It's not a recreational fire. So having opportunities to have these conversations internally so that the land is accessible to everybody. And then on the right is another picture of that beautiful floor built at Northwestern using Menominee lumber. So again, how are we creating partnerships not only for access to the land through ceremony, but also through business partnerships as well to support Native communities nationally. So I'm looking at my time real quick. I want to make sure we're pretty good. I also wanted to take a moment and mention one more thing. Let me check my...
I can smell that fire.
Right?
On the picture.
It's time. So this was a beautiful opportunity. And again, I guess what I'm trying to get at is within your organization, when you write the land acknowledgement and you are making a promise to work with the Native community, be ready for these asks around access to the land to start coming in. And whether it's access for ceremony or it's access for harvesting, these are important things to take into consideration when you're writing your land acknowledgement, so that your organization is ready to appropriately respond to these requests, right, in a respectful way, in a timely way, because this is really what it's all about. It's the land acknowledgement as an active statement is a vehicle to start building relationships with Native people and the Indigenous community within your region. All right. So,
all right. So now we're going to kind of ask you all to just do some reflection based on what we shared with you at the beginning of this presentation, or just what you know broadly, just to take some time to reflect. I know we normally do like breakout rooms and chat in small groups, but just to avoid the switching, if you have like a sheet of paper or however you journal or take notes, ask yourself these questions. What does the land acknowledgement ask of us? And what resources do you need to use a land acknowledgement? So if you, based on this information, what else do you need? But also, what resources do you have? Maybe you already have a relationship with an organization, or you're familiar with something already. So think about what you have, and then finally, what relationships do you have and or need to establish? So the land acknowledgement has to be tied to, living, breathing partnerships and relationships with living, breathing Indigenous communities. And so that's an important thing for us to ask is, what relationships do you have? Because not all of us are starting from nothing. But then also, what relationships do you need to establish? So we're going to invite you all to, as you're take a few moments to, jot down your answers, but also if there's any big takeaway, you can add that to the chat of things that are coming up for you with these questions.
Now, while everyone's doing that, I forgot to mention something in the previous slide that might help with you answering these questions. So as you write and reflect, I just wanted to add a few things. So some examples of the way that other organizations have operationalized this work with Native communities. I wanted to give the example of the National Park Service, and they have tribal liaison officers because it offers an opportunity to have a point person within your organization that can kind of help navigate some of the policies, some of the other departments, right? If you're a big organization, there's lots of people to know, and it can be hard to make these requests, like having a winter ceremony where the fire's on the ground is an example of that. The other two pieces that I wanted to kind of acknowledge and point out is that we refer to Native serving organizations quite a bit, and tribal governments. Now, in the state of Illinois, there are no federally recognized tribes. That's not to say tribes weren't here, but they were forcefully relocated onto reservations through a number of different treaties and policies. But it's important because if you're working with local tribes, it's going to be you're going to have to look nationally, right? I'll give you an example of the Miami. The Miami tribe has a reservation in Oklahoma. So just recently we did a post, we were working on a post about skunk cabbage, right? It's going to start blooming soon. It's one of our first. And we're working with that tribe on translations of skunk cabbage in Miami. And we had to work with the university that's in Oklahoma. So that's an example that our work here is going to take you outside of the state of Illinois. Now, working with the local community, you're going to be working with Native serving organizations. So these are nonprofits. An example would be the American Indian Center of Chicago, who's a close partner of the Forest Preserves of Cook County. So that distinction is important because if you look locally, you may not find much in the way of tribal governments because there's no state recognized tribes, but there are plenty of Native serving organizations. And also broaden your look outside of our state and look at the reservations. Look at Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Michigan for those things. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yes, and in Chicago, in the Chicago area, there's a coalition of Native serving institutions, the Chicago American Indian Community Collaborative, referred to as CAKE, that serves as a coalition of Native serving programs and organizations, knowing that there are no federally recognized tribes in the state, and providing more visibility and a platform for like shared voice for Native issues and advocacy. So that's another body of folks, at least the entryway into what's going on in the Chicago area.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to jump onto the next slide. Hopefully everyone could write and reflect while I was talking.
I did see a good handful coming in about building relationships with Indigenous communities. And then someone asked how to find out what the native history of the land is. And I saw Kelly shared a link to the native land. And I think that's a great start. The one thing that I would say about finding history is to use multiple sources. And there are treaties. I know for at least Northwestern's history, we started with the Council of the Three Fires because that was the last treaty of folks that ceded the territory. So the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi. But then as we were building relationships, keep stressing that important part, we were learning that there were actually it was important for us not to just honor these like formal written governmental documents as who has stories to this land, and added Menominee, Miami, Ho-Chunk, and that might happen with you as don't see the land acknowledgements as a static statement. So. And you're gonna learn more history along the way.
For sure.
Let's see. Oh, yeah, it kind of gets us into the best practices.
For sure. So we covered a lot of this.
Sure.
Go ahead, Jasmine.
Yeah, so I already shared. Well, I'll just say that I believe that land acknowledgement is and building those relationships with Indigenous peoples, it's very place-based. So wherever you might be building those relationships or developing that land acknowledgement statement, I feel like it's going to look different because it's place-based. So when I say best practices, I don't know, when I just hesitate because what works for one community might not be appropriate for another one. So just be mindful for folks wherever you're at to kind of take the cues from the Indigenous folks that you're building relationships with. But I will just say that, to kind of see it as a living, breathing document. The only constant is change. The tribal communities are not static. Their cultures are not static, although the values at the core of it might remain. But don't strive for perfection on that first, statement. And as you're learning, there was a lot of work to kind of bury our histories and our voice. So it might take some concerted effort to, uncover and learn. So if you're improving and changing and evolving it as you go, that I'm just one person, but I'm giving you that space to do that. And the pitfalls for the land acknowledgement is that folks can say it can be performative if it just feels like a checkbox, or like at the beginning where you're like, okay, the bathrooms are over there and here's the land acknowledgement, and and so finding ways to make it meaningful for why you're gathering and connecting it to why you're gathering is going to be important. Also, just a couple of other ways that you could do beyond the land acknowledgement statement is listening and learning. I feel like you all showing up here today is part of that. If there are other conferences, if there are mailing lists or listservs that you can sign up for, and showing up. So thank you, Wawanan, for showing up this morning. Also investing, it doesn't have to just be a financial investment, but if it's a time and talent, and then also promoting. Part of the issue with Native communities is just fighting that hyper invisibility. And so the more that we all can work together to promote, to center Indigenous voices, knowledge, etc., then that's going to help kind of close the gap and to fight the marginalization of Indigenous folks.
So this is our big closing activity. How will you use what you learned from today? So this is an opportunity for you to make a commitment in the chat box to our community, our virtual community here right now. So I'm going to go to the next slide because I want to make sure everyone has access to our contact information. So Jasmine's on the bottom, I'm on the top. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. I'm going to stop my screen share in a moment while everyone's writing down their commitments in the chat box so I can see everybody again.
Yes, so I don't know. There's probably research out there that says if you write it down, then maybe you're more likely to follow through with it. So we encourage you to just share one thing that you're committed to doing after this session and to share it with us in the chat box.
This is great. So we could take a moment to maybe answer some of these questions too. So I can take the first one. So I'm reading right now. I'm wondering. Okay, so the question from Susan is, I'm wondering if there's a way to share private land or make it available. How to learn more? That's a wonderful question, right? So I think that if you're a private land owner, you can go through the same process. It's about connecting with community and service of community in that capacity, right? So if you start doing outreach and figuring out where the native serving community organizations are, I think it's being visible and knowing that this is a resource and making the resource available as the opportunity kind of arises. What do you think about that, Jasmine?
I appreciate that question and that commitment, because I know that there's a lot of Native advocates that have been, I don't know if you've heard of the hashtag land back as like the ultimate, I feel like I read a comment about it by just being acknowledging it as window dressing, but actually like providing access or returning land is like the ultimate. And so I think getting in touch with folks who maybe are at the lead of those efforts would be a good start. Let's see. Oh yeah, virtue signaling. There it goes, Kathleen. Thank you. One of the ways that, just to answer the larger question that she asked about, how do we go deeper, do more, and make sure this doesn't happen? I think at Northwestern, we've kind of institutionalized some of those relationships with Indigenous communities. So establishing the Native American Leadership Council, we're going to have to meet with them once a year and they're meeting with our president and our provost, our leadership, to provide feedback. They meet with stakeholders across. We kind of give them an update, and so we have these systems in place that make sure that we're staying on the radar of leadership and are doing work to push those original 59 recommendations forward. And so establishing, like, either it's an advisory council or leadership council, some sort of body of folks that institutionalizes regular communication and partnership feedback from Indigenous folks, I think helps make sure that we're staying, that we are going deeper, and not just saying it, taking the easy wins or letting it fall by the wayside.
Mhm. That's great. I was going to answer a question that Beth Lang had about, she was curious as to what the Field Museum offers. And as you guys may or may not know, that they've been renovating the Native American Hall there and looking at which items would be repatriated out back to tribes, how they acquired some of those items. But working even further in the terms of land acknowledgements, they have an excellent list of tribes that were historically throughout this area. So we have more of the contemporary tribes that we talk about in our land acknowledgements, but their anthropologists, cultural anthropologists over there did a great job. So if you go onto the Field Museum's website and check out their land acknowledgement, there's tons of resources, and they've really did an extensive job on their research to make sure they're representative of as many of the tribes as possible.
I'm seeing some good commitments in here as I'm scrolling.
Jasmine, what was the name of the coalition that you mentioned earlier?
Chicago American Indian Community Collaborative. I think their website is chicagoaicc.com. But there's about 17 different organizations that are a part of that collective. They meet on a regular basis. Actually, they're filing, they have their articles of incorporation and are headed towards a formal 501c3, but they've been meeting regularly since 2012. And so have been growing and
yeah, and there's a Facebook group too, or a Facebook page. So that's another great way to just like the page and stay connected to the conversations happening in community that way. Oh, Kyla, I'm going to answer Kyla. So how do we incorporate Indigenous land management practices? Some tribes, and I'll give you an example of the Ho-Chunk Nation. I was in a fantastic training with leaders in the Ho-Chunk and one of the land trusts, Joe Davies County, and they were talking about management of mounds. And there are mound management plans. The Ho-Chunk has designed some because at this point, like if you have sacred sites on your land, how do you manage them appropriately? And there are resources out there to do that. So my suggestion would be doing a little bit of research within the Ho-Chunk Nation, but then there's also land management best practices around sacred sites, so that through this process you can start enacting best practices right away. So that's a great starting point. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just reading some of them. Make sure our college doesn't just tick the box. That's definitely can fall easily into that. Someone got a grant to create permanent signage. That's awesome. We've at Northwestern, we've been struggling with the signage, I think, because we don't want to have, the straight lines, bronze plaque, but we've been working towards establishing some outdoor garden space, maybe with some medicinal plants or just native plants to the area that can be accessed by the community. Again, place-based having access to that land is so important, and so that's one of the ways that we're tackling it.
That's great.
Oh, nice! Someone shared the land back. Thank you. You all see. I
All right.
feel like everybody is
This is
brings their
wonderful.
pieces, their knowledge, their information, their relationships. Cool.
Yeah.
Trickster, yes, they are part of the Cake Coalition, American Indian Center, the St. Kateri Center, which Adam mentioned earlier. So
Yeah, I think that
I scrolled to the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Joe Davies Conservation Foundation is a great resource. They've been doing this work for a long time and connecting with tribal governments and native serving organizations.
Awesome.
So very good. Well, that kind of brings us to our closure here. We're at about 10 o'clock right now. I just want to thank everybody for joining us and spending your morning with us.
Yeah, thank you, Owen and